Hi, my name is Shannon Miller, and I'm an attorney with the Miller Elder Law Firm.
And I'm Scott Anderson, attorney with the Miller Elder Law Firm.
We're here today to tell you a story about a decorated Korean War veteran, Michael McCadden. He came to us, our law firm, in December of 2017 to tell us a tragic story really, about his situation. He came to us penniless, having lost his entire life savings, and he really couldn't tell us what happened. So we sat down in December of 2017, Scott and I, and tried to figure out, what had happened here. Mr. McCadden was a gentleman of senior years and had several recommendations during his service in Korea. And what he told us was that one of his daughters had manipulated him into losing he was exploited to the tune of about $550,000.
Mr. McCadden was one of those clients that when he walks in the door, or over time anyways, he just really endeared himself to us, and his story was tragic. Unfortunately, his daughter went through a process of creating a trust and ultimately taking 3 properties, including a brand new home and 2 townhouses here in this area that had belonged to Mr. McCadden, and effectively evicted Mr. McCadden from his own home, and that began the downward spiral for Mr. McCadden as it related to his assets and unfortunately also the stress and his health.
Unfortunately, Mr. McCadden's daughter had also used his identity to create credit card theft, and so she and her husband were actually criminally prosecuted for that offense. We were able to sit down with him initially, try and figure this thing out, and I remember we were very fortunate that the trust that had been created by the daughter for Mr. McCadden really wasn't for Mr. McCadden at all. In fact, it was a trust where Mr. McCadden put all of the assets into the trust, but the daughter was the only one who could pull money out, and she was the only really named beneficiary of that trust. It was a very complicated scheme, but in the end, Mr. McCadden ended up at the Atrium, unable to pay his bills. He actually had to apply for something called aid in attendance through the Veterans Affairs because he had very limited income and all of his assets were unavailable to him. Yeah. So it was a really, really sad situation.
Meanwhile, the daughter had sold one of the townhouses and pocketed all of the proceeds, transferred a partial ownership interest in the house to her husband, and enjoyed the profits of that process while Mr. McCadden, again, was left without it.
The house that was left in dispute was a rather large home in a nice neighborhood in Gainesville called Oakmont. Eventually, the criminal process proceeded, and Mr. McCadden's daughter and her husband were, in fact, they pled no contest to the charges and were put on probation. And at the same time, we started to really fast track the exploitation proceedings, and we were actually able to reach a settlement in that regard.
So when Mr. McCadden came in, we mentioned he was vibrant, he was energetic, he was a dancer, he was a sharp dresser. He swam every day when he was at the residential community. And over time, we saw the toll of the stress and the, being able to live the type of lifestyle that he was used to, which was never extravagant, but it was somewhat comfortable, having built himself that comfort over his lifetime.
I think the stress of the litigation also really weighed on him. I know that for our firm, we did a lot to just try and keep him supported in place. We helped do his laundry, we took trips to the grocery store for him, because he really couldn't drive anymore. He was suffering from a really bad heart condition, and his health continued to decline. I remember one situation, it's tragic. I hope I can get through this. It was Christmas last year. And his sister, who eventually did come into town and stayed with him for the last really 2 months of his life, round the clock, she had not been able to get to town yet, and Mr. McCadden was left in the VA hospital by himself. So, we took our time to get over there and see him, and it was really sad. He was lonely, without assets, without a lot of financial support of his own, and so this was where we, unfortunately, Mr. McCadden spent his last Christmas.
And so Shannon mentioned the settlement that was entered in October of 2018, and it was anticipated that that would allow Mr. McCadden to separate, stop the stress, and move into one of the townhouses and just have some money in his pocket to live the rest of his life in some level of comfort. And instead, through legal positioning and a lot of underhanded activity, Mr. McCadden spent the last 5 or 6 months of his life dealing with the fallout of that settlement agreement not being honored.
Yeah, and so really what happened was we were trying to get this Oakmont property sold so that Mr. McCadden could have those monies and be able to use them for himself. Mm-hmm. And so eventually, with a lot more litigation, unfortunately, we were able to accomplish that goal. Mm-hmm. And while Mr. McCadden was with his sister and, with other family members that came to rally around him, we were able to go and tell him that he did have money now. His money had been returned to him. We were very happy about that. But sadly, Mr. McCadden passed away shortly after that.
And so in some ways, justice was served. We were able to advocate for him to get him that information before he passed. And I was smiling. No, it's not a great part of the story, but I remember going to visit him the last time and how happy he was to know that there was some justice. But unfortunately, it had already taken its toll on him.
And I remember bringing him Dove bars, because that was his favorite. He loved to get a good Dove bar, and he would just smile from ear to ear. So we're happy to have spent some time with this amazing man. Mm-hmm. One of the things that he made us promise was that we would tell his story. And we're going to keep doing that. That's why we're here. So thanks for listening.
Thank you.